This is the project bin, where I go through all my new acquisitions and fiddly projects related to model railroading, and today I'm going to start with these three boxcars. In front of me now I have a trio of Athearn Blue Box, Camino, Placerville, and Lake Tahoe boxcars. All three of these I bought from a friend for $5 each, making this lot a total of $15. So, the Camino, Placerville, and Lake Tahoe, the CP and LT as you can see here, was a railroad that operated in the Northern California area, specifically around the town of Placerville, and they had a bunch of interesting operations. They had some of these boxcars, they had a 44-tonner, and they had a couple of shays. I need to do some more research into the railroad, but from what I've found, it is actually a really neat place. And the town itself is actually really cool. I go up to the town of Placerville quite often. There's a bunch of auto racing stuff I like to go out and see up there. So it's a really neat town, and I'm really happy to have some boxcars from the town in my collection. For $5 each, all these cars did come with KD couplers and metal wheels. However, being $5 once again, there was a lot of work I had to go and do to these pieces of rolling stock. For each of these cars, I had to go in and add the correct weight, work on the side doors, I had to adjust the coupler heights, and on these two specifically, I had to install some new coupler boxes. When I got these cars, a couple of them had doors that were glued in place in the open position, and some of them had doors that just weren't glued in place whatsoever. So what I did is I removed the glue that was holding the doors open, I pushed the doors into the closed position, and then I used just a little bit of canopy glue to hold them in place. This means that if I wanted to open them up in the future, I can do so, but when I'm running a train, they aren't going to slide open as the train accelerates or slows down. The other thing I did to all three cars, as I do to all my rolling stock in my collection, is I adjusted the coupler height of these cars and made sure all the couplers were at the correct height. For this car here, it was pretty easy. This has a older roundhouse style underframe, so we already have boxes that were held in place by screws, and while it doesn't look the greatest underneath here, it was actually pretty easy to get this car to the correct height. These two newer cars were your typical Athearn Blue Box style of car, and I've had some issues with those coupler boxes. So lately what I've been doing is I've been cutting them off the frame of the car. You can kind of see right here where the box used to be, and I've instead been drilling and tapping them into the frame of the car themselves with some new KD boxes, and that usually seems to work really well. I like the results, and the coupler heights seem to be a lot more consistent. The only issue on this car is that the weight was kind of off center. It's the same case on this car as well. So on this end, the coupler sticks out just far enough. There's really nothing extraordinary here. But on this end, it's kind of inset into the car a little bit. It really doesn't look that great, and I don't think it hinders operations that much. But in the future, on both this car and that car, I might go in and swap one of those couplers out with a coupler that has a longer shank. Even with that work, for $5 each, I think this was a pretty good deal, and I'm really happy to have these cars around. Next up, I've been doing a little bit of experimental work on my Seaboard GP18. This is a locomotive I got in rough shape in a lot of other models a couple of months back. A while ago, I filmed a revival of this unit on the channel, and since then I've been using this locomotive as sort of an experimental test bed because there were quite a few things I wanted to try out with these AHM GP18s, as I've owned quite a few of them in the past, and there are some issues I want to see if I can correct. Prior to the experimental work I did recently, I did two other little pieces of experimental work to this unit, the first of which was the styrene roof. I have not had a ton of experience with making things out of styrene, and when this model came to me without a roof, I decided it would be a great thing to try out. I just tried crafting up a curved piece of styrene, and while it's not perfect, I think it does the job pretty well for a cheap locomotive like this. The other experimental repair I did involves both of the trucks. On these AHM units, not just the GP18s, but all of them, they have a truck design that I really do not like, which I can show you on the rear of the unit. Here we have this little black plastic piece here, and that is partially responsible for holding the truck into place. This extends off of the black plastic truck and is a very thin piece of material, and how this holds the truck in place is that we have this weird neck on the truck cover, and to get this into place, you just kind of have to slide this black piece through the truck cover and then clip it on in the back. But these long plates are very prone to failure, and additionally, they hold the coupler in place. So I've had so many units where this piece breaks off, and then there's no way to have a coupler, and your truck cover keeps falling off. To combat this, on the front truck, which already had this plate broken off, I removed this long neck here. I found a crack in the truck cover itself, which made it a little more difficult. and I instead drilled and tapped a screw into the front of the truck, and that seemed to work pretty well, although it was kind of a jarring look. To correct that, I went in and I covered up the truck with a little bit of styrene. Well, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb here. With a little bit of paint, it'll look a lot better. And this actually does a really good job of holding the truck in place. This piece on the front is mounted perpendicular to this piece here. So this one extends further inward and covers the top of the screw. And this piece just covers the front so there's no gaping hole here. And then on the back, you still have your regular clips, and that's the way you can pry up on the truck cover, unclip it, and remove it from the model. I've experimented with this, and so far it seems to work really well. The only thing I do really need to experiment with is how to install a coupler in this setup. There's the really large gaping hole for the pilot due to this odd coupler design that I really don't like, and I would like a way to fill the pilot and install a coupler box. Again, this would probably be done easiest with the 3D printer, so I don't yet have one, and therefore I need to think of another creative solution to filling that. The other thing I've done involves the posts of the locomotive. On these GP18s, the posts that hold the shell into the chassis of the model are very, very weak. There are these two little rings on each side of the cab that are very prone to failure. I don't think I've had a GP18 that still had both of them intact. And then on the rear of the unit, there is a little clip that you kind of have to maneuver into place. Those always break on every single GP18. I've never seen one that hasn't been broken. So I wanted to see if I could devise a solution to better mount the shell of the model to the chassis of the locomotive, and I think I've found it. So let me take you underneath this locomotive and I'll show you a little bit of that, and then we'll take the shell off this unit and I'll show you what I've done in here. Up front, you can kind of see that I've got these little tiny self-tapper screws. There's one on this side and one on the other side. Then on the back, you can see some more odd stuff. This is where the clip would have usually gone in, and there is a big piece of styrene and a little self-tapper. The hole here is too big to fit one of these self-tappers into. It would just fall straight through and wouldn't be effective at holding the shell into place. So I had to make a styrene plug and stick it over that, and that seems to have actually worked very well. Inside the shell of the unit, I just used a mixture of styrene tubing and some plastic cement to hold it into position, and that seemed to work really well. Up front, I really had to make no modifications. I had to file down and remove the existing broken terminals for the screws, and instead put the new styrene tubing into place, and there was really no issue whatsoever there. The only real hiccup I encountered was going over to the back of the model when I had to install the tubing on the flat back of the shell. Since the styrene tubing is curved, it really wouldn't adhere all that well, so I had to kind of file down the edge of this tubing, and then I used some plastic cement, and that seemed to work wonders. So with this whole setup, the shell is now firmly attached to the locomotive when it's in place, and I think this will be something great I can use on my other GP18s if I find this problem once again. And I may have another GP18 I can try this exact same solution out on. So even though this unit will never be a show quality model, I think it'll be a huge help when I go to work on more of these AHM GP18s. It seems like I'm always winding up with some of these things, so it's really nice to have some good solutions to common problems on these. Now we move from a model that is not show quality in any way to a very nice model that could for sure be considered a show quality piece. This is my new Broadway Limited Fox River Theater car that I just bought, and I'm quite happy with it. Some of you may know, but I've been working on building a very specific Union Pacific business train, and for that train I needed this exact car. So when Broadway Limited announced that they were coming out with one, I decided to pre-order it and got it for a pretty good deal. This is a very nice looking car, so let me show you around all of its features very quickly. This isn't going to be a comprehensive review or anything, I just kind of want to show you around this car and tell you what I like and don't like. Around back you have this really big window. You can see that there's like this huge theater room. I've been told this car is mostly for presentations and whatnot, but it's a really neat looking piece. You've got some marker lights here, and we've got a whole bunch of lighting all around this car, which looks really cool when it's all lit up on the back end. Something I really don't like about this car, which I believe is a pretty common issue on these Broadway Limited cars, at least from the other one that I own, my UP Power car, are these little antennas here. These are not made of brass, they're made of plastic, and given the price point of this car, that's really disappointing. These are definitely going to be extremely fragile, so I'm being very careful with them, but I really do wish Broadway Limited would have made these out of brass instead of very thin, brittle plastic. The A end of the car is also a very similar story, but I do have a couple little gripes about it. You can see we've got some more antennas right here, and both of these are also just molded on plastic. The end of the car does look nice, and we also have some marker lights here, which is kind of neat. There's some nice little detailing down here, and I think the front of the coupler box looks a little bit better than it does on my UP Power car. But some complaints I have about this car that also translate to my UP Power car and my Kenefic business car have to do with the diaphragms and the couplers. The diaphragms on these cars are just molded on plastic, and again, at the price point of this car being over $100, as with the other two, I would expect this to be more of a rubbery material. Again, it's not the end of the world, but it's not really a great detail. The other thing too is these couplers kind of stick out a little bit far. I think this is to help these cars navigate tighter curves, but when coupled with the other Broadway Limited cars, they stick out quite a bit too far. When they're connected to my Walthers cars, they look just fine, but I would really like to fix this and shorten up the coupler boxes on all these cars, maybe replace them with some new Katy boxes just to make them look a little bit better. Going around to the side of the car, everything looks really nice. In here we do have a conference table, which is easier to see when the car is lighted. Another little teeny tiny gripe I have about these Broadway cars is that the lighting isn't all that bright. I'm sure I could change it, but I wish it was just a tiny bit brighter. It's a little bit hard to see in broad daylight, which I guess is kind of normal for passenger cars. But going underneath the model, there's a bunch of really nice underbody detailing. I don't really have anything specific to point out, but I think it looks nice. I also don't like that you can't screw the trucks into place. You can't really get a good 3-point suspension out of these cars, but since they run just fine anyway, I don't see it being a huge problem. And then on the roof, as I mentioned, you have a bunch of really nice looking detail pieces. The roof being white compared to the typical gray is actually prototypical. I've seen this car in real life, and that's a feature this car actually does have. So despite some of its shortcomings, I am really happy with this car, and I think it'll do really well on my UP business train that I'm currently working on building. Transitioning from some models I bought recently to some models I've had for ages, I've been working on this Illinois Central Tyco C630. This is one of the first ever locomotives I got, and it's been pretty thoroughly abused, and for the longest time had never been running right. So I had some time the other day, with some of the new knowledge I learned about fixing trains and whatnot. I went in, cleaned everything out, made some minor adjustments, and this thing runs almost perfectly. I still need to install a headlight, but given the condition of this model when I started working on it, and given the fact that it's a Tyco, I'm really happy with the result, and in a little bit I'll show you this thing running. I also did the same to this Tyco 460. This is the Spirit of 76 unit that I actually worked on a couple months ago on the channel. I revived this model, gave it a few new detail pieces, and it seemed to be a pretty good result. I did a little bit more work just tweaking with the model, and I think it runs even better now. It's not a major improvement, but I thought it was something worth mentioning. Next up, I've done a little bit of work to my DCC BNSF GP60M and my BNSF GP40X. Recently, I bought a lot of 3 other GP60Ms, all BNSF from eBay for fairly cheap, and this is actually not one of those units. This is a unit I bought for $50 a couple of years ago, and I've had in my collection for quite a while now, and I've been doing a little bit of work to this thing recently. I threw out the old Athearn circuit board that was in this because that causes some issues with lighting, and I installed my own custom lighting into this unit. I used some light guides, and I believe either 503 or 603 LEDs. I can't remember off the top of my head, but the lighting looks pretty good, and I'll overlay an image here really quickly just so you can kind of see how it turned out. I'm pretty happy with the result, and I think it makes a huge difference, so I've been using this unit quite a bit lately. On the other hand, the GP40X is also a model I've had for quite a long time. I got this thing for free a couple of years before I got this unit, and it's been in kind of rough shape. When I got it, it was not in working order, at least I recall. I think it was missing the circuit board, and I had to do some sketchy wiring to make things work. But this thing is also in kind of rough shape. We have some handrail damage up front, but again, other than that, it does run. So when I took the circuit board out of the GP60M and replaced it with the new circuit board, I kind of wanted to see what would happen if I threw the circuit board from this unit into this guy. And just to go along with it, I tried to wire up the exact same custom lighting, again with the same LEDs and light guides in this unit, and unfortunately it didn't work, which is what I was expecting. I think with a new board it'll wind up working out, but I really haven't had luck with custom wiring and the stock Athearn boards. But at the end of the day, the GP60M now has some really nice looking custom lighting, and the GP40X now has DCC. These are for sure going to be long-term projects, however. On both of these units and my 3 other GP60Ms, I want to replace the original circuit boards, I want to add custom lighting, which these two already have a head start on. I want to add DCC and sound to all these units, and I would also like to upgrade all these to have Northwest shortline motors because I think that'll be a huge improvement. Ideally, maybe some manufacturer will come out with a new run of GP60Ms or GP40Xs before I get around to completing all these projects. If so, I'll for sure pre-order some, but if not, I'll try and get all these projects to be completed, and I'd really like to have them all running great, maybe even with ditch lights and all that fun stuff. Next, I have a whole bunch of rolling stock in front of me that I've been working on recently. All of these models that you see here came from a lot of free model trains that I got a couple months ago, which I filmed an entire video on. There's still a lot more for me to work on, but these are just some of the pieces that I have completed so far. Most of these were pretty simple repairs. I either swapped out the wheels for new metal wheels, I worked on the coupler heights, replaced old couplers and things like that. But there were a few little different things I had to do to some of these models, so I'll go through that. But for the most part, these are really simple repairs relating to coupler height, weight, wheels, that fun stuff. The first of which is this Chicago and Northwestern 2-bay hopper. This is an old Atlas car, and what I had to change here is underneath the car. Usually these Atlas cars come with little pins that hold the trucks in place. I really don't like those, so if I bring the car up closer, you can see that I replaced the small original pins with some self-tapper screws, and that seems to do the job pretty well. I just haven't had the greatest experiences with some freight cars that use pins to hold in the trucks, and I much prefer using screws. Next up, we have this pair of Roundhouse Chicago and Northwestern coal cars. These I didn't have to do anything too out of the ordinary to, but it was just a couple of small little things that are worth noting. Again, regular couplers, wheels, coupler height stuff, and weight, but the other things I had to do involve some of the little brake details on this car. Down here, they were all kind of out of whack. It was the same case on the other car, so I fixed them up with a little bit of canopy glue. And in addition, I was able to add these really cool looking coal loads to these cars. I was also doing some research and found that these cars, even though they're 40-foot cars, were built in about the 1980s apparently, which is kind of odd. And given the fact that we have these two and 3 other pieces of Chicago and Northwestern rolling stock that came from this lot, I do think it's about time for me to get a good Chicago and Northwestern locomotive to go with it all. I do have a Dash 9, but I don't think that would fit with some cars like these all that well, so I'm thinking maybe either a Jeep of some sort or potentially an SD40 or something like that. But if any of you have suggestions as to what C&W locomotive I should get to go with this new rolling stock, let me know. Another little noteworthy piece is this neat little cattle car. I believe this is painted for an actual model railroad instead of a real railroad, but this was a car that was sold factory from Roundhouse, and someone's done some custom weathering to it. But really what's noteworthy about this car is I had to do almost nothing to it. I added a new brake wheel, but when I went to go work on the coupler heights and the couplers themselves and adding weight to the car, all that was perfect. The trucks were exactly where I needed them to be, the couplers were at the right height, and someone actually added some weight to this car already. The only thing I did want to do was see if I could get these doors to close, but they are securely glued in place, and I really don't want to break them. Plus, I think it's fine if this one car has its doors open. And the final piece of note here is this kind of neat Virginia and Truckee car. This is riding on a Roundhouse chassis, which is noteworthy because this is not a Roundhouse shell. And to make this work, I've had to make a few modifications if we flip the car over. These Roundhouse chassis have metal stirrups built into the car, and obviously this shell already has stirrups on it. So I took the original Roundhouse chassis that was in here and replaced it with another one from the lot that actually had some broken stirrups. I broke the other two off, and it actually looks pretty nice now that I've filed it down and cleaned it up. I used some canopy glue to hold the little string that makes up these trusses into position, and again did the basic weight, coupler height, and all that fun stuff. And I also installed this new brake wheel on the roof. And just like with the Chicago and Northwestern rolling stock, I've been accumulating a lot of this old-time rolling stock. I already have a couple of Shays, but I don't know if those are the most appropriate to pull cars like these. And I have a couple of more I haven't talked about or finished up just yet. So stay tuned for some of those. There's more old-time rolling stock coming. But I don't really have a good high-end locomotive to pull these things. So if anyone has any suggestions, preferably something West Coast based, please do let me know, because I'm also kind of on the hunt for a nice old-time steamer. So while it took a fair amount of work to get all these cars up to snuff, I thought I'd just show you some of the more interesting work I had to do to these pieces because for the most part, nothing was really different about working on these cars, except for a few small things from car to car. And if you're interested in seeing what I do with more of these cars from this lot, stay tuned. I've got quite a bit to work on, and I've currently got one that's a work in progress, and that is a pretty neat piece. And now, the final thing I have to mention is I've been working on not one, but two of my old Varnney F3 models. To get everyone up to speed, these are two models I bought along with 5 Globe Models passenger cars off of eBay for a total of only like $27, which for models this vintage is really not bad. I went to work on these Varnney F units and really wasn't happy with the result, but I have been heavily using the Globe Model passenger cars, and this was probably a year or two ago, and I finally got around to working on these units, and I've got them running much better as well. Since these are still old Varnney units, the current draw is pretty high and they're pretty loud, but they do run fairly smoothly and I'm really happy with it. The thing I'm indecisive about right now though is whether or not I want to keep these things or if I want to get rid of them. The problem is I have the old vintage passenger cars that go with these things, but to make these work with those passenger cars I would need to install Cadies. And if I flip one of these things over, you can kind of see there's really not all that much room to do so. You can't get a Cadie box in there, and if you were to attach a Cadie box, it would be sticking way off the back of the unit. And if I wanted to put a Cadie on the front, the opening on the front of the pilot is so small, I don't think a Cadie would be able to fit through there. So I really don't know if it would be possible to get Cadies on these things, and if I have these things around, I do want to use them. Plus, since these are old Varnney units, even though they are obviously custom painted, they're still probably fairly desirable, and they'd probably do better in someone else's hands than with me not being used. So once again, let me know what you think about these guys. Should I modify these units to adapt some Cadies onto them? Do you have any suggestions as to how I should do so? Or do you have any other suggestions about what I should do to these guys? If so, let me know down below. But before we close everything out, let's test out both these guys and the other two units I showed you earlier. Now it is time to test everything out. I'll start with the first Varnney unit that's currently set up on the track. I'll give this thing some power and just show you how this thing performs. Now the other direction. Again, this being a model from the late 1940s or early 1950s, I expect it to be loud, but the thing does seem to run pretty smoothly. Now here's the second unit. And now I'll put it in reverse and I'll show you what happens there. So while neither of these two are perfect, given their age, I think they do run pretty well. Next, here's the Tyco 460. Now I'll run the thing forwards. And I think this one runs incredibly smooth now. Now it's time for the C630. I'll stop it and I'll bring this one around forwards. Again, for a Tyco, I think that is pretty impressive. And finally, just for fun, I'll test out the Seaboard GP18 since I talked about that one earlier. And I'll run it in reverse just for fun as well. And despite this also being an experimental unit, I think it runs pretty well. So that is it for this episode of the Project Bin. If you do have any suggestions about what I should do with anything I've shown you today, please do let me know. I love to hear all of your feedback.